We have heard a great deal of dogma against a vote for Brexit over recent weeks. They warn, albeit generically never precisely, of dire consequences should Great Britain extricate herself from the European Union. It is therefore essential to consider that all these bodies are in receipt of EU funding. Hardly impartial commentators. Giant investment banks Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have pontificated to us minions with dramatic wording. Should we, the people, have the audacity to vote for a Brexit? Yes, these very banks who bankroll BSE. I am Emma Jane, and on behalf of the Bruges Group, I am joined by two very hard-working English businessmen who have built their enterprises in different sectors. Both gentlemen hope for a Brexit. They are Charles Watkinson, from Corrosioneering, a Leeds-established global company servicing capital plant equipment. Then we have London-based corporate finance advisor Edward Farmer of Intrinsica Partners. This is an open conversation with Charles and Edward covering a range of issues inflicted upon the UK by the 7 bodies of the European Union.
Yes, we started as a two-man band in 1974. In Leeds, we have expanded around the world, and now we operate in 27 countries through approximately 33 branches and employ just over 1,000 people. We repair capital plant and equipment, power stations, oil refineries, and our trade is global. We export about 68% of everything that we do. A lot of it is outside the European Union, and it's because of that reason that we obviously don't have the fear that some people have whose business is entirely dependent upon the European Union.
So a lot of people that have business do think the EU is a good thing, but actually what you're finding, is it not, that regulation is actually getting in the way of your dealing with countries outside of the EU?
It would be better, in my opinion, if the UK had its own trade agreements with countries rather than having to rely upon the European Union. There are 28 members in the European Union, and they all have to agree before anything happens. I know with our small board of 6 people that sometimes life can be difficult when people disagree. I can't imagine what it would be like if we had 28 members who had to first go back to their own people and then come back and agree between themselves. So we have a constant drip of petty regulation, some of it not so petty, but regulation from Europe that many people don't know about. It's emanated from a faceless bureaucracy that we can't elect. My local MP, if we don't like what he's doing, when it comes to election time, we can vote him out. The bureaucrats, it's just impossible for us to deal with them, and they seem to be multiplying at an ever alarming rate.
Well, what about an argument, the EU directive, that the sort of people supporting workers' rights on the time that they are actually at work is a good thing? How has that affected you negatively, or your staff?
It has impacted upon us because obviously people are restricted in the amount of hours that they are allowed to work. There has been a recent ruling about travel time having to be included in the work hours, and whereas in some instances I can understand that, in a lot of instances it should be down to the employee as to how they feel. If you stop somebody working after they've been travelling, that person was probably earning money for travel time, and that will now stop because now it's included in their normal hours. And so many people, not only employers but employees, are very unhappy with that.
Right, so it's controlling people's opportunity to earn a bit more money as well.
Exactly that.
Okay, so if I can come to you, Edward, a lot of the big banks, as we know, are very much in favour of us staying. You've worked for big banks in the past. You have a completely different view. Can you tell us why that is?
Largely because I'm pro-democracy, and most big business, including the banks, don't really understand the concept of democracy, really. They deal with it because they have to, but in reality They want to just make money, and they want to get the rules and the environment their own way. So what's very notable about big business is most of the big banks, and indeed the big multinationals who they service, are using Europe really to exclude competitors by essentially lobbying, and there are 30,000 lobbyists in Brussels who set the rules that favour, on balance, the bigger players and not the smaller, more entrepreneurial businesses who don't have the resource to go lobbying and pay for expensive lawyers and accountants to support their cases in Brussels.
So ultimately what you're saying is it's stifling new businesses and young people and entrepreneurs that actually are the people that really set and run the economy, even getting started.
Yes, that is very true, and it's very noticeable that quite a lot of the entrepreneurial, self-made businessmen, so the guys who set up JCB, for example, Dyson, for example, are all strong lead candidates. They are entrepreneurial, they are innovative, and they more importantly, they actually take risk. And so these big businesses don't like taking risks. They just want nice, established, cosy, protectionist positions. And that is, if you like, the hearts and minds difference between the two camps.
I think interestingly, a recent World Bank survey rated Italy as 83rd out of 173 in the ease of doing business. Germany, 20, and the UK, number 7. I think that's
great.
very telling. Why do we want to be in an organisation where it is difficult for people to do business?
Agreed. And also, Europe only accounts for 20% of global economy. So we are essentially, in business terms, over trading with Europe to the tune of about 40. We have 40% of our business there, and it's declining. When the rest of the world, 80% is actually growing at much faster growth rates. So
Right,
that's another good reason
you'd
for
like to
trading
see
elsewhere.
us being able to actually access
Yeah.
other parts of the world without being stopped.
Better, yes, and not being held up through the inability to do trade deals, exactly.
Some arguments I've heard for us staying are about reforming and about us sort of putting our foot down, and the fact that as a nation it is in our spirit that we cross the T's and dot the I's, so to speak, that it's sort of our own fault that we follow the regulations to the T and the other countries don't. What would you say to that?
I think there is some truth in that we play by the rules, whereas many European countries just simply get away with what they can get away with. Subsidies is a typical case in point, where some countries seem to be able to subsidise their industries, but every time it comes to the UK wanting to subsidise an industry, we can't do it because of the EU rules. So I think that in this particular area of level playing field, we're not in a level playing field. And it's interesting for me that although we're the second largest contributor to the European Union economy, to their budget, David Cameron went cap in hand, and not one of them wanted to come to the party and say, yes, we'll change this in order to help Great Britain. He came back with, in my view, absolutely nothing. He came back saying we've got to change Europe. Well, I agree we have to change Europe, but the change is much for the worse. Unemployment is growing rapidly. Social unrest is growing rapidly. From the point of the UK, there is no change Europe. We are just simply being milked for what they can get out of us, and our say in the multitude of 28 countries is diminished, and yet there are more and more countries wishing to join, and our voice will be diminished every time a new country joins the European Union.
Yeah, I think we've seen very clearly that reform is not on the agenda. In fact, I think Cameron, whether he was going there to really get change or not, the proof of it is there was no treaty change, and that was resolutely stated both by Merkel and Hollande that there is no treaty change on offer. Treaty change is absolutely at the core of reform, and that's not being offered, which is kind of ironic since we are a big contributor. And the fact that we're debating this and it's taken Cameron so long to try and get some sort of deal, and he's been flatly refused every day that goes past, shows you how incapable of reform the European Union really is.
And so how do you see it going forward if we stay in? Is there going to be more federalism, less chance of reform? Some people say by saying we could argue for reform.
Well, it's been explicitly said in the 5 presidents' reports that ever closer union is on the cards. Yes, if you look at the structural imbalance in Europe, the euro has been very good for Germany to export to Southern Europe. The mirror image is not great for Southern Europe to Germany, so the euro has not worked for Southern Europe. High level indebtedness to the point of almost going bust, as we've seen in Greece. They can't repay it, so the fundamental choice is, will the Germans forgive that debt and allow people to reset in Southern Europe, or will those countries come out of the euro, which of itself will break the union anyway? So it's a rock and a hard place, and that is definitely on its way.
And is it not the case, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of the debt that Greece has is actually interest?
Could well be. I haven't looked at that.
There is a significant amount of interest, and I think the Germans should remember that after the Second World War, they had a very, very substantial debt to various countries in the world, not least of which was the UK, a lot of which was forgiven.
Completely written off.
Written off. And I think the Germans need to bear that in mind with regard to what's happening at the present time in Greece. Was it right for Greece to join monetary union and have the euro? Absolutely not. And I was very disappointed to find that they didn't come out of it, because I feel they would already be recovering. I feel that our own economy will not be affected by us coming out of the European Union. Nothing is going to change overnight. After voting day, whichever way it is, there is nothing going to suddenly drop off the edge of the cliff. Many people have this fear that suddenly they'll be forced out of their homes and shipped in cattle trucks back to Europe. What a nonsense all of this is. It will simply mean that we have to start negotiating our way out of a very complex structure, and that will take time, and we will obviously come to compromise agreements. It's not something that is just going to be a drop-dead situation.
Yeah, and it's also I think the trade deficit with Europe is about 40 billion. So, and 1 in 3 cars are German, and we obviously take a lot of French imports as well. They're not going to stop trading with us, because if you add that all up over time, their politicians would be under extreme pressure from the big car manufacturers, to name but one.
A lot of people actually say that we, the Brexit campaigners, haven't got an answer for what will happen, but I think you've both actually just said how things will look and develop if we do leave. Is there anything you can add to that?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look at the models of Switzerland and Singapore, and particularly Singapore. Singapore had no technology. It was a very poor minor state at the end of the Malaysian Peninsula, and they moved from making T-shirts up to higher-end electronics. Then they developed a banking industry, and then they have that port, so they trade with the rest of the world. They're now probably the second richest nation state, and it's entirely through their own effort. They trade around the world. They don't feel they have to be part of some economic union with their fellow country members in Southeast Asia.
So can you say anything that the EU has done for us that's good?
What I can say to you is that if you look right now at the European economy, you look at the economies of Italy, you look at the economy of Spain, where nearly 60% of people under 25, 60% don't have a job. You look at what's happening in Greece, you look at the riots in France because they're trying to put back from the 35-hour week to 38 hours. Why would you want to join such an organisation?
Yeah, the only other thing to add is on the defence side, perhaps, is one of the main reasons that everyone says Europe is very important in terms of the EU is it stopped, quote unquote, stopped a war in Europe, and that is again a nonsense. The thing that's really kept the peace in Europe since the war is NATO and other organisations like Five Eyes, which is the intelligence services which we share with Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand. We are a nuclear power together with France. That's what's kept the peace. And I remember when I was growing up visiting my friends in Germany and literally looking at the East German border where the Cold War was in full flight. British Army officers told me we fight for 5 days and we buy time before we push the nuclear deterrent. That's what kept the peace in Europe, and it's nothing to do with Europe and Europol, which is really just an administrative postbox. It still relies on police services and military forces in each of the dependent states.
And this is very important that you point that out, because a lot of people do say to me that they believe they're safer by staying in the EU. So thank you for clarifying that. So we have the fisheries policy, which we know, and I don't think anybody particularly argues with, as being incredibly detrimental to our fishing industry in the North East and South Shields and Scarborough and Whitby and Filey. We have the Common Agricultural Policy, and then I believe that we have something that's about to come out with our ports that they're actually writing up at the moment in Brussels.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
I understand that it's really to try and harmonise the whole ports industry. The driver is it to make the less efficient European ports more efficient. Ironically, the British ports, which are all privately owned, so ABP and Hutchison, for example, both privately owned, they are probably the most efficient ports in the whole of Europe anyway. And so this particular legislation will probably slow them up rather than help them. So again, it's just another example of we were doing it pretty well anyway. We don't need to be told by yet more legislation on how to do it less well.
It's what I understand is our ports industry. If we have lots of small ports, they employ 100,000 people.
Yes, indeed.
Nationally, and I may be wrong in this, but I understand that what the EU is trying to do is actually get them to subcontract the work out that they're actually already able to meet the demands of.
That's probably something structural. Again, I'm not an expert, but one of the things I understand is most of the ports are municipally owned or state-owned in Europe. So I saw this with the industry actually of super yachts down in the south of France, where actually it's the local council that runs the local marina, and actually being able to service these yachts is very difficult because it's council run rather than sort of privatised out, if you will. So they're obviously trying some sort of privatisation, but whether that will actually work in practice, I don't know. What I'm hearing is it won't actually add very much to what we already do, which is pretty efficient.
Right.
Certainly in the UK.
You mentioned the fishing industry. The fishing industry has been absolutely decimated in the UK. I can remember when you could go to Hull and there were fishing vessels almost as far as the eye can see. The port at Whitby was completely full. The last time I was in Whitby, there were 3 fishing vessels there. The way that industry was decimated by the European Union is really shameful. It's unbelievable. And then we have the Common Agricultural Policy. We are paying to subsidise very inefficient farming throughout the European Union when we could be being more, using that money to more effect here for things like hospitals and more doctors, better policing. The whole thing is just really bizarre. And we used to have a Commonwealth where we bought food from Australia and particularly New Zealand, used to supply us with a lot of butter and lamb, and when we joined the European Union all that had to stop, and there are quite large taxation problems for people wanting to import food into Europe. That has simply put up our food bill here in the UK to a significant degree. I understand it's about 20% greater than it needs to be, and that's very significant. And for me, that's another reason why we need to be out of the European Union.
You mentioned just there the NHS, which we know is very stretched. However, the Remainiacs will claim that the NHS is largely propped up by EU migrants working there. However, I believe that's only 5%. Is that correct?
Yes, and you could argue that if we didn't have the large influx of immigrants, we wouldn't need the extra NHS services anyway. The problem with a large amount of immigrants coming into the country that is indefined and undefinable is how do you account for that? How do you make the infrastructure suitable for the unknown? It's about governance at the end of the day. You can't govern a society that you don't know what it's about and how big it is.
To add to that, I do quite a bit on the affordable housing space on finance terms. The stat is we're about 2 million homes short here in this country, and the supply-demand imbalance is very much we're just very short of housing, and we're not building enough. So we've got to recognise we are a small island, and we can only take so many people. And my personal view is we should pick on merit We shouldn't just take them from the European Union, we should take them from all around the world, according to the skills we need. So if doctors and nurses are short, why not take them from Malaysia or Australia or elsewhere? We don't have to take them from Europe as a priority.
There's been a recent report actually
From the Royal College of Nursing shows that 80,000 British students annually are being rejected from nursing courses. All the while the NHS is hiring from the EU.
I honestly don't know the answer to that
I
one,
read
but
that the other day,
you don't surprise me if that's true.
So the point I actually probably was going to want to make was actually to deal with the Anglosphere countries. It means we do have the same language on board, so we don't have the
certainly Australia,
safety issues with language.
Certainly Australia and New Zealand were very badly treated, in my view, in '75, because essentially the Commonwealth states were just dropped unceremoniously in favour of the new best friend, which was Europe at the time. I'm surprised they wish to talk to us, really, because, I mean, certainly coming back to the point about butter and lamb, certainly New Zealand had to completely refocus its agricultural industries, primarily meat and dairy produce, and grow new markets in Asia, which actually is quite a good example for us, because they have actually, whilst it was tough to do, they actually have made it work, and they're now a much more balanced trade with Asia, and they sell very little to us as a result.
Well, would we hopefully be able to get them back on board?
Indeed.
So to finish off, I want to see what you feel that you can tell us that's positive about us leaving the EU.
We are a vibrant, technologically advanced and developed country. A lot of innovation for things that have been developed since the Industrial Revolution have been generated from this country. I can see no reason whatsoever why we would not survive and even thrive without the impositions that we have from the European Union.
Exactly the same. It's an aspirational agenda. You know, I'm a member of the Global Britain Group. It looks to the world and it doesn't wish to rely solely on Europe. It thinks of the opportunities in terms of growth and opportunity. We are innovative, we have good universities, we have the best universities in the world, or some of the best universities in the world, and we should be developing new technologies and taking services, which again is not covered by the European Union very well. Our service industries are the first in the world, our legal system is absolutely the envy of the world, and we can take these services all around the world and not be impeded by Europe, who have threatened various financial services tax or transactions tax on the city, for example. Whether that will happen, I don't know, but it's certainly been mentioned, and I haven't heard it go away yet.
And also maybe from a socialist point of view, the tariffs that are imposed on countries outside the EU, like Africa, which have actually not helped its economy at all.
You can go on and on with that.
Yeah.
I would just like to say that the Remain campaign have generated a huge amount of statistics that nobody can prove or disprove. But I always like to remember the phrase that there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I think people should bear that in mind when they're looking at some of this information.
Yeah, I mean, you're being offered two visions of the future, essentially. It's either a restrictive sort of trade barrier, declining, pull up the drawbridge to Europe, or you can be aspirational to go and make money around the world, and that's the optimistic. So the Leave campaign is a very optimistic message in my view, and that's why I'm personally supporting it.